Cool. So hopefully everybody got a chance to get through most of that. But yeah, this is in the lesson plan if you want to refer back to it later. Let's go ahead and kind of recap together why is it useful to use validations before we get into more detail about how they work. Would anybody like to raise their hand and share something that stood out from that section of the Rails guides that we were just reading together? Why would we want to use validations? And I'd love to hear from somebody who hasn't shared yet today. Thank you though, Ben. Jordan, go ahead.
I don't want to jump straight to the very end of it, but the part that really caught me that was kind of neat was the new record part, I think, at the end. Because I guess that way you can maybe just try to validate all new information coming in if you don't need to validate maybe stuff that's already there.
Yeah, that's a good point. So kind of what I'm hearing in that is the relevance of the timing of these validations. Basically,
Yeah.
So the advantage there would be we aren't putting anything bad into the database. If anything makes it into the database, we know it's the kind of information we want, right? So
yeah, it's almost like a version control in a way.
Yeah, let's say maybe we could sum that up as ability to control what is added to the database. Great, thank you, Jordan. Anyone else? Alexa?
My takeaway was that you should be doing your validations at the model level. This made sense based on what we learned in Ruby, that the class should be responsible for its own attributes and whether they're valid.
That's great. Class should be responsible. Thanks, Alexa. Anyone else? Chris?
Yeah, I like how it said to keep the controller skinny, kind of to piggyback off Alexa, say, keep everything at the model level, even though having it required in the view helps, it's better to have it at both places.
Thank you. That's really good. And yeah, I'll also add in here view, or let's say client side, since that could be a few different things. But it's good to have validations in multiple layers of your app, right? Since yeah, like we saw and like we saw before we started reading this paragraph, there are ways to bypass things on the client side, but maybe it's useful so that you can give your user some immediate feedback. They don't have to wait for a whole request response cycle to see, oh, I forgot to fill something in, right? Thank you. To have validations in multiple places. Cool. I think the only other thing I would add here is maybe that it's database agnostic. So while we might have something in our, let's say one of our migrations, or we see in our schema that there is a column that says null false or something like that. We realize that there's like a constraint on the database, but if our app is going to be used across multiple databases, for instance, that's a good use case for also having a model validation, so that regardless of which DB you're connected to, you're still getting the data and the data types that you would expect. Cool, this is great. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just gonna double check here and make sure I didn't forget anything that we should talk about now. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. Joseph.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do we learn how to encrypt the data once we get it at any point?
That's a good question. Could you, do you have like an example in mind? Or are you talking about like maybe password encryption or things like that?
Yeah, I think just like I know that using the like private method is helping keep it like helps keep those params private, but like I guess it's more just like the security aspect of it, like keeping the user's information safe when we're actually designing these websites later on, you know, or these
Yeah,
apps.
totally. That's a great thing to be thinking about. My somewhat non-answer to that at this point would be that there are a lot of different tools in Rails to ensure that information is encrypted or to encrypt and decrypt. Some of that kind of overlaps with, especially for that particular example, like of like a user's password that I mentioned, like some of that overlaps with tools for authorization and authentication. And I would expect to delve into that a little bit more later on. Validation, like as far as today and talking about validations, we're mostly going to be talking about making sure that anything that is added to a model is, like a model isn't created in the database without having the data that we would expect associated with it. But that's a good question and something to keep an eye out for in the future.
Thanks.
Of course. Anybody else have anything to add before we move on? Or questions? Cool. Let me share this again. Oops, didn't want full screen. Cool. All right. So moving on to these model level validations, and we talked about it a little bit with that last paragraph here in the reading. It mentions that there are two kinds of active record objects, and the difference between those two types in this case would be objects that we're just creating with the Ruby new saying maybe like artist.new. And then there is the type of active record object that has already been saved to the database, which would be something that we would do with like a create, for instance. And the reason that they bring this up and the reason we mention it here in this lesson is that we want to talk about where these model level validations are run and how they handle different scenarios. So they're run on save, create, and update. And let's see. You can also create custom validations to run on any of these with like an option. We can get into the exact syntax of that later if it's relevant, if anybody wonders about it. But these are the big three to remember when it comes to your validations running and the data getting inserted into the database. And these validations are going to run before that SQL query is sent. So basically we're looking at, active record is looking at what you're trying to do. And maybe it's a create, and it's going and checking that all the validations pass and that everything's good and gravy before it goes and sends the SQL insert, for example. And we can see this in the console let's just to kind of demonstrate what we're talking about here. I'll move this up so it's not distracting. Okay, so maybe we have, say, A equals artist.new. And you can notice that there's no ID associated with this, obviously no name or any other information. And at this point, no validations have been run. But if I were to say a.save, when I hit enter, the validations are going to check and see if I have included everything that we need in order to create this record in our database, which we don't. And there are a few different examples of that we're going to go through, like all the different methods and how they're going to respond. So one way to check this is to use active records new record. This will return true or false. And since we haven't put this in our database, this is going to return true. If I were to say a.name equals, this hasn't been saved to the database, so I can manipulate it here. Maybe I want to say artist name is, let's see, Brittany. Then I can maybe look at A again, double check to make sure this is still a new record for whatever reason, and then a.save should return true. And now if I call a.new record, it says false. And the difference there is this is no longer an active record object that isn't in the database. This has been added to the database. And if I wanted to update it from here, I would need to use the update method. So yeah, I think we have time before we take a POM. Let's go ahead to this next exercise. Let's see. And I'd like to get a volunteer for each row of this that we'll fill out together and kind of talk about why this behaves the way it does. But Jacob, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question with like the new record method.
Mhm.
If we weren't putting timestamps in for like a lot of this stuff, would like stuff come back as false more often? Like, oh, it's we already have someone named Brittany, but the timestamps make it unique.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that the timestamps have anything to do with this behavior, but if anybody knows that's incorrect, I'd be open to being corrected here. But the way I would think about this is we have, let's try a new one, let's say B equals, and we'll just, because you were, in your example, you were saying maybe there's another artist named Brittany already. Let's do this again. So we can say artist, if I can spell, artist.new. So we're instantiating an object, right? And we're instantiating an active record object. But I do want to mention that we always have access to new in Ruby. This isn't anything particularly magical, right? So we have this in memory. We have it with the B variable. We don't have any created at and updated at. The new record has less to do with timestamps and more to do with the instance of this class. So this instance has not been saved to the database. And when this instance is saved, then it'll no longer be considered a new record, regardless of timestamps. And I'm pretty sure that if we were to go through this whole example without any created at or updated timestamps, as far as new record is concerned and actually saving to the database versus just starting up a new, spinning up a new object, the timestamps wouldn't really have any effect on that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Cool. Great. If people could raise their hands, I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 volunteers to work through this chart. We'll just go in the order of whoever raises their hand, or people will be voluntold. And we're basically going to predict, to give you an idea of what this next exercise is, we're going to predict what this method is going to return to us based on whether or not the validations were successful. So I'll go ahead, Will, let's walk through this together. What do you have an idea of what we might get back if I were to run? Let me get rid of this and I'll say artist.create, and I give it everything it needs. So we expect it to be a success. And maybe I'm going to say pilots. What do you expect this to return to me once I hit enter, Will?
I think it'll be true.
True? Okay, let's try it. So it was successful. We didn't get true back as a return value. That's okay. But we did get back, like we did see everything that happened in the SQL and we got back the artist object, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So this gives us created object. And I'm like, I realize I'm asking you to guess here because we haven't covered this before, but what do you think it'll return to us if we give it a create and we don't pass it what it needs?
Honestly, I just don't know. I was wrong at first, so I'm just gonna stick with it and say it'll return false.
That's okay, cool. And yeah, it'll tell us that it rolled back, it wasn't able to create it, and it still gives us the object, but it hasn't been created. And thank you, Will. That was probably like the trickiest one. I apologize.
No worries.
Non-created object will be returned here. I'm not sure who raised their hand next, but I'm going to go in the order that I saw people. Angel, do you want to walk through this one with me? The create with the bang?
Yeah, so I think the success will return an artist object.
Okay, it will return an artist object. Let's see. Yep, exactly, good call. It does the same thing as without the bang when it is successful. What about when it's not successful, when you have the bang?
I think it's going to return an exception or an error.
Yeah, exactly. So when we add the bang to these methods, I realized my last one didn't actually have a bang, so I'm going to walk through that again. But yeah, exactly. When we add a bang to these methods, it's instead of failing silently, as we might say, it's going to raise an exception. It's going to raise an error, and that can be useful in our applications. We can get into the details another time, but let's just let's try this again. Let's just say artist, and that has the bang. It's going to return the object, and then if we have one that is not valid with a bang, it'll return the error, or sorry, it'll raise the exception. Active record, record invalid, validation failed, name can't be blank. And it even gives us a helpful message here. Cool, thank you, Angel. And we'll say raises exception. Jesus, do you wanna work through the update without a bang with me here? What do we think update is going to return if it is successful? And let me type this out here real quick. Artist, last is who? All right, we'll call that A. We're going to say a.update, and we're going to give it the criteria it needs. So we'll say name something. What do you think this is going to return, Jesus?
The updated object.
Let's see. So there's the gotcha. It actually returns true. Yeah, that's okay. What do you think would happen if we did the same thing without any information here?
Will return false.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, it'll return false.
Cool.
Very good. Let's keep it going. Joseph, let's walk through what about if we did the same exact thing that we just did on this line, but now we add a bang? What would we expect with the successful case?
I imagine it'll still return true.
Let's check it out. I guess I should probably give it a different name. It will return true.
And then, yeah, the false will, I assume it'll give a reason why it returned false with an error.
Yeah, it's a great way to think of it. Not only does it return false now that we've added the bang, but it will raise the exception just like we saw before. Cool. I'll just take one more volunteer to walk through the last two. And that would be save and save with a bang. Anyone? Ben, cool. Let's go through it. What do you expect if I were to run, let's say, let's find one to update real quick. Or actually, we'll say a equals artist.new. Now we have a new object and we want to save it. And what if I give it a.save or a.name equals so that I can save it. Let's say artist 3 or 4 or whatever. Now, if I run a.save, Ben, what do you expect it to return to us?
I think this should return true.
Let's find out. Yep.
Cool.
What if I start a new one, b equals artist.new? What if I run save here and it doesn't have all the information it needs? What do you expect it to return, Ben?
It should give you a rollback and then return false.
Yep, exactly.
And then you want me to do the bang as well?
Yeah, you just go ahead and what do you expect with, let's go back up to b.name. And what if I save with a bang? What do you expect?
I think it should still return true.
Yep, exactly. And then what if I try to save this new artist with a bang and it doesn't have anything?
I imagine it's going to give us the same exception as before, where it's like name can't be blank. Yeah.
Yep, perfect. Thanks everybody for walking through that. It seems like a small thing probably now looking at this, but it's really valuable to know what to expect when you're using these different methods, just because validations are so important. So I'm glad we got to walk through all that together and maybe like make predictions and see how this behaves in a way that we might not have expected right off the bat. So let's go ahead and take a palm and come back at 9:37, and then we'll get into some practice and exploration and all that good stuff. 9:37. Cool. As people are starting to come back, we can start getting ready for the practice portion of today's lesson. We're going to be checking out the validations branch of the setlist repo, and I'm going to go ahead and send these instructions to your cohort channel. Give me 1 second here. And in a moment, I will be breaking people up into pairs or maybe a couple of groups of 3 to work through these. I'm going to go ahead and send these to the cohort channel before I forget. And before we split out into breakout rooms, I wanted to just kind of take a look at the resources that I sent together. I've heard from a few people in like feedback for these lessons that it can be really helpful to see an example before going out to work on something on your own. And my brain works the same way, so I completely understand. I'm looking up examples almost constantly when I'm learning something new, especially. And part of today's productive struggle that we want to encourage is that you're able to go out on your own and take these concepts and the whole why of using validations and kind of look through the documentation and research how to implement it, at least in like a simple way, and then work your way up. These do get more challenging as they go on. But yeah, in lieu of a full example, I thought I'd point out some things that I think are helpful in the documentation. And then after about 30 minutes of working in our pairs, we'll come back together, talk through some questions and have more work time. So I hope that's helpful. But here are some shoulda matchers. I would highly recommend working through these with test-driven development so that you can kind of see the difference between the validations working and not working, et cetera. And also just because it's a good habit. But here in the shoulda matchers GitHub documentation, I would recommend, you have all these active record matches. You have validate uniqueness of, you have belong to, you can test your associations this way. So let's see, what's another one that I might click on here? And really we want to focus on these model validations. So the exact link when you click on this is going to take you to the active record validate uniqueness of matcher. And you don't have to stay in this one file to look at these examples, like it should validate uniqueness of title. This is a great example for this exact validator, but then, yeah, like I was saying, you can find more of them over here on the like homepage of the README or the root page of the README. As far as so that's for your tests. And then as far as for active record validations, if you scroll down through this page, you might see some of the things that we've already talked about, like that blurb that we read at the beginning of class is directly from this documentation, from the Rails guides. This will go into some of the behavior of when validations happen that we also covered. But then if you keep scrolling down, there will be a whole section on helpers, and I'm actually just going to search for it. There we go. So this can be like a really great resource for some examples. Here's one. Imagine you have like a checkbox and you have to validate that people are accepting the terms of service in that checkbox. There are other examples like validating the presence of something. Cool. So again, I sent this to your cohort channel. I'm going to break you out into groups. Does anybody have questions about what I'm asking you all to do? Okay, and I'm going to make these breakout rooms. Give me just a second. Okay, I'm going to open those rooms and we'll come back here in 30 minutes or so.
Well, I wasn't able to get that to work, the validations for length of, which I don't know if, well, I guess everyone's coming back now.
We'll have more time to work through some of the stuff.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Before we like move on to questions and sharing out and stuff like that, could people use the raise hand reaction if you like, if you got all the way through all these bullet points, will you raise your hand? I just want to make sure we're not all done. Okay, cool. Great, then in that case, I'd love to see some things that people like got working, but before we do that, did anybody have any questions? Maybe we can look at first. Okay, if we don't have questions yet, that's fine. How about a hand raised reaction if you got to, like if you finish the fourth bullet point, access validation errors for a specific attribute when a validation fails on a model in your console? Sweet. Okay. Let's see. I want to call in some people just to look at some of these examples and see how people did it. Diana, would you be willing to share the very first bullet point, add a validation that validates the uniqueness of an artist name?
Yes. So what I did is I added.
And you could, can you share your screen? Sorry, I should have.
I was gonna say, you can't see what I'm talking about. Okay. There we go.
Awesome.
And this is what I did. I just added a line in the artist model that says validates name and uniqueness true.
Awesome. Did you have a corresponding test for this also?
I did not. I wanted to try to get through them.
Yeah.
So I didn't do the test. I just did it on the console.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. Let's see. Oh, I shouldn't have put your hands down. That's okay. I'll take a volunteer. Can somebody show, let's see, I think the second bullet point is pretty straightforward, but how about, can somebody like show us how you accessed the validation errors in your console? Take a volunteer. Jake, yeah, let's see what you did.
Sorry, I was able to get here through the console with the help of my lovely partners. Am I sharing the right screen?
Looks like it.
Cool. So we put our validates in here. We did our tests in here, and then we just went into the console. First of all, we went into like our database and checked our songs or our artists to see like which ones we had in there. And then first we spelled artist wrong on purpose, and it came back with a different error. And then we spelled artist correctly, and it came back with a validation failed, name has already been taken.
Awesome. So if we wanted to look at that error in more detail for the object that wasn't saved to the database, how did you find a way to do that in the console to look at those errors?
I don't think so.
That's cool. If anybody else did, you can just go ahead and shout it out and maybe like navigate a little bit for Jake here. How could we find an error for that last object?
I think it's a.errors.full message.
Cool. Thank you, Kwa.
A.errors.full message like that?
Yes.
Maybe full messages, plural.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, we have a nil class for your A variable. Could you actually zoom in a little bit so I can see the text?
Sorry.
No, you're good. Okay, so let's try what Kwa was getting at again. Can we do like A equals artist.new and then you give it nothing? Could we try that?
new, and just give it nothing.
Mhm. What happens now if you do that a dot? Let's just do a dot errors for now.
We're not gonna get anything. Because it's not an error yet. If you do a dot save, that's when it's gonna save to the new artist.
Yeah.
And then if you do now, there should be an error. But do 2# or dot full messages.
What do you want me to do?
Dot
Yeah,
2#.
let's either way is fine. 2# or full
Yeah.
messages. Let's see what that gives us. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
That's pretty useful, right? Thank you, Claude. Does somebody want to share like another way for, I guess it would be for the fourth bullet point here, access errors for a specific attribute when a validation fails in your model? Who wants to share about that? Joseph, I see your hand up. Is that something that you were able to do?
You want me to stop sharing?
No, keep going. We're here. We might as well.
You can do pretty much the same thing, but right after errors, you can put brackets, colon, and then whatever attribute.
So like so?
Yeah, and then do dot full message. Is at least, I don't know, that was
I think it's messages.
I think it's
Is it messages?
Yeah.
You can run it without the full messages on there too, and you'll get the error.
Yeah, that's
really?
interesting. I've never actually, with these specific ones, I've never actually run full messages. I think another thing you might be able to do is, if you just do a.errors again, Jake, let's look at that object. You should be able to also do details, so a.errors.details. And that gives you back slightly different information as well. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. Jake, if you want to stop screen sharing, that's fine. Yeah, so those are just a few ways to access those specific errors and different information about them. Can anybody think of a reason this might be useful to be able to access that errors object? You can raise your hand and we'll talk about it. Kyle, go ahead.
So you could essentially iterate through the list and then render it to your new page if you're asking your client or user to fill out information. So you can specifically say like, hey, your email or your password has to be X amount of characters. Your name has to be shorter than 26 characters, stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. The one really great example is that this can be a way to provide feedback for our users and actually give them something helpful so they know what to, like if it's on a form, then they can fix what they entered on that form. Awesome, thank you. Cool. I'll open it up for questions again. I don't want to get too far in this list if people haven't had a chance to complete it, but did anybody have anything else that came up that we can talk about before I open up the breakout rooms again? Angel, go ahead.
I was wondering how to test, which we just kind of got to this, and so we didn't really have much time to Google, but I was wondering how to test the max length, like how to write a test for that.
It's a good question. Do you mind sharing your screen?
Yeah. So I was just trying to test this, validate maximum of, but that didn't work.
Cool. Okay, yeah, so this is an example where I don't know the exact syntax off the top of my head, but I think it would be valuable to look it up together. So do you have the shoulda matchers and the active record validation documentation handy?
Yeah, I have now I have both, yes.
All right, well, let's just start with shoulda matchers. Let's go over there and see if we can find something that has to do with like length. So this looks to me like it all has to do with uniqueness. Why don't we go back to the main page of the repo? If you scroll up. No, sorry. The shoulda matchers repo.
This one.
Yeah, if you go to like the very first link there next to the, yeah, like let's just go back to where it says shoulda matchers on that line.
Oh, this one?
Mm-hmm. That should take us back to the README. And if we scroll down. So what I might be inclined to do here is just to like Command F and search for length. I don't know if that'll work, but let's see if we find any actual documentation about it. Yeah, validate length of. Cool.
Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, can you click on that link actually?
Yes.
Yeah, that looks promising. And maybe here we'll find an example. It looks like validates length of is the, or yeah, and then should validate length of, and then it also probably is going to want to know what you're validating. So it should be at least 10 characters, or I wonder if there's like the opposite option. So this is making sure it's at least a certain length. We want it to have a maximum. So if you keep scrolling down a little bit, is at most. Do you see that there on line 75?
75 here.
Yeah. So this is the example I might model my validation test off of. So if we translate that over to your line 39 in Atom, I think what we would want would be something like it should validate length of title. And personally, I would add in the parentheses just to make it more readable. Yeah, exactly. And then is at most. And then whatever variable or whatever character or integer you had in mind there. Why don't we run the test and see what we get back? Okay. Cool. So now it looks like we're testing the right thing, right? Do we want to go ahead? Let's go back over to Song and see if we can implement the behavior in this test. Yep. Title. And then looking at the shoulda matchers docs, it looks like we can just see here that they gave it another key value pair maximum colon. Yep.
Oh.
The difference between these two. Oh, yeah.
My
My brain didn't even see that. Thank you. Amazing.
Sweet.
Hope that, does that help answer your question?
Yes,
very,
it
very good.
does. Thank you.
Cool. I'm glad we got to walk through it together. Any other questions? Looks like good stuff here in the chat, but unless somebody wants to bring it up, I think I'll go ahead and open up those breakout rooms again. Yes, and if anything comes up, please feel free to ask us for help. We can float between your rooms and see what's going on. So we'll do another, I think we'll do 20 minutes. Let me get that set so that we have time to come back at the end. And okay. That's weird. Hey, Jordan, which room were you in last time?
Me and Qua.
Okay. Shoot, I think it randomized. I didn't mean it for it to, but I'll get you set in a room. Give me 1 second. Yes, 14. Okay, does everybody have a breakout room? Andrew, do you have one?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, cool.
I just want to say that I think this is a great exercise for them.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad. I looked at, I think it was the last inning.
Get out of here. Sit.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. So we're kind of close to time to wrap up here. I wanted to allow a little bit more time for questions and also walk through a couple of the gotchas that are in the lesson plan. So I'll open it up for questions first. Did anything else come up that we should walk through? Anybody run into something that was just really strange? Qua.
Yeah, I was hitting the roadblock of validation runs on an update. I was curious if you can help me out with that.
Okay, could you share your screen and we'll take a look together?
Oh no, sure.
Take your time. This is valuable. I think a few people got to this part and had some questions.
So I think this is how we should enter it. We create a new column named favorite in playlist.
Okay.
And so I did validate presence true on update because that's what we're testing on, right? That only runs on an update. But I don't know how to test for that.
Gotcha. Okay, let's take a look at your test.
I don't have any test.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I think that I would start in a similar place that we did last time. So like maybe going over to the shoulda matchers docs. And let's see, this is just the one specific file that provides details for validating uniqueness. I wonder if we can maybe go back to that main shoulda matchers page. Yeah, let's try. Can we go back to the root of the repo? So on shoulda-matchers. Yeah, I just kind of want to see there. Yeah, if you scroll down to where we have our active record, I think it is, like keep scrolling down, there should be some links in the README. Yeah, so how about we look at active record matchers? I think that would be where we would find it. And then we're looking at presence of. Is there a link anywhere here? Or maybe you'll need to search with Command F, but like presence underscore of. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I thought there would be, I'm gonna look as well, actually.
So presence of.
Yeah, so actually Dominic shared something in the chat that that looks like a helpful syntax. And for the sake of time, why don't we just try that? I think you would be able to find it in these shoulda matchers docs if you looked around a bit, but why don't we try adding,
I don't see the chat right now, I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's fine, I'll navigate. Let's say it, and then open curly brackets, should validate presence of, and yeah, validate underscore presence of. And then in parens, you can give it the symbol title. And similar to how we saw on that at most, whatever, we can chain onto that another method to give it more specificity. So I think what we're looking for here is .on. And then what was the action?
Update?
Yeah, so you can put that, yeah, I think parens or that would probably work just fine. So why don't we run the test and see if we get the failure we expect?
I'm gonna get a different failure, at least one, but.
Okay. Okay, so.
Cannot be empty or falsy.
Let's see.
Ignore this one. But,
okay.
It's this one down here.
The matcher attempted to set title on the playlist to nil, but that attribute does not exist.
I think it's because you use title instead of favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah, because our column is favorite, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh. Okay, expected playlist.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Can we read the error? Expected this object to
this one is
to.
Different. This one is a different error or failure.
Okay. Yeah. So you already have that. I'm guessing. Can we take a look at that validation? I didn't get a good look at it. I'm guessing you already have it implemented on your model, right?
Yes. Validate. Presence of.
And can we look at your playlist model as well while we're here?
My playlist model.
Yep, and on line 5, that's why that test passed. If we were TDDing this, we'd probably want to comment that out and run the test again, but for the purposes of, yeah, you want to just do that real quick?
Yes.
Thanks. So what's the error that we get now?
Favorite cannot be empty or falsy.
Right. And if you read the details here, it expected it to be valid, but invalid, but it was valid instead. If you uncomment that validation, then your test should pass, as we just saw. And that's how I would approach this point.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have questions or things that they want to go over? One thing, I do have one other thing I wanted to look at, but go ahead, Jordan.
Thank you. I was wondering on that kind of almost exactly the same note. I was Quas partner even, so it's pretty close, similar question. But could we do that with the active record, like the new record question mark? I was wondering like if you could do like, I don't know, like if favorites is a new record or something like that, or is that only when you're creating it for the first time, not when you're updating?
Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I understand your question correctly. So you're saying, what were you trying? What are you asking about validating on the update?
I'm wondering if we can use .new record question mark to validate for an update, or if that's just for the initial creation or like save situation new.
Right, good question. That's only for an object that hasn't been entered into the database yet. So that .new record question mark, that method is only going to work on new objects that hadn't been saved yet. So for an update, if your update doesn't work, it's just going to revert to what it already had in the database. So I don't see new record as being very useful in that scenario. That would be something that you would use when you're creating something and trying to insert it into the database.
Cool, thanks.
So that would be the same thing as create then, correct? Like colon create instead of colon update?
Right. So if you wanted to, if for some reason you had a scenario where you needed to use new record before, like during or before the validation, then you could say on create and then run your code, and until it gets to save, that'll be accessible to you. So I don't see.
Oh, wait, create is saved too. Okay.
Yeah. So it would need to be something that you use before actually executing the create. It's hard for me to come up with an example right off the top of my head of how you might be able to use new record. I think that's probably most valuable when you're kind of walking through stuff like we did today to see, hey, has this object saved, or like, yeah, it's not necessarily something that I would see you using in code super often. It's more to illustrate the timing of the validations, if that makes sense. So when we started a new object and we asked if it was a new record, that was to illustrate, yeah, this hasn't been entered into the database yet. But once we get past the validations and they're successful, then it's no longer a new record. And we include that in the lesson plan as a way of, yeah, just interacting with the code and understanding when the validations happen. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that method specifically. Does that answer y'all's questions about that?
So.
Thank you. Cool. We're getting kind of close to the end, so we don't have to work through the whole thing, but did anybody run into weirdness on the Boolean, on like trying to validate a Boolean field? Can you like raise your hand if you found a solution to that? Andrew, could you share your solution with us real fast? Could share your screen. I'd love to see how you got past that Boolean.
Yeah. It wasn't in anything like in the Ruby docs or anything, but we created for playlists, we created a new column called slaps, and we were trying to validate its presence on update. And basically I was missing this presence being true here. I had in the docs like this stuff here that I was trying to add in, and it still wasn't working. It was saying like, it was saying that we were like missing supply at least one validation. So I added like presence true.
Gotcha.
And it passed the test. So it should validate presence of slaps on update.
Okay.
Now passes.
Because we're running kind of close to time, what I would say here is to keep poking at this. and maybe like make sure that this all still works. Experiment with like adding in a nil value into that column versus a false value, et cetera. The main thing I wanted to point out is exactly what you have pulled up here on the right-hand side in the documentation. False dot blank will return true, which is not what we would expect. Like false is a value, but some of these validations will consider it as empty. What we really want to exclude is nil values. So I just wanted to highlight that part here in the docs. It's also in the lesson plan. That's a pretty common gotcha on validations, is handling Boolean fields. Thank you, Andrew. You can stop sharing. But I'll call it here because we're pretty much at time, and I wanted to make sure to remind everybody to please fill out the survey that's attached in the calendar event. And that'll be it for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jameson.
Thanks, Jameson.
Thanks, Jameson.
Thanks, Jameson.
Thank you.